Thank you, John and Spencer and the others who helped out with worship this morning. My name is Terry Seufferlein. I'm here with my wife, Catherine. We come from York, Nebraska. When John asked me to come preach today to you, I agreed, not expecting to know anybody here, but know Mike Holloway from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Nick and Thessaly from Nebraska. I knew John from York, the college. We went to college together, Catherine and John and I. So we've known each other for decades, lost track of each other for decades, and then ended up in Nebraska here decades later. So it's good to be reconnected again. But Larry and Mary, way back, back to my teenage years. So I'm hoping they've forgotten most of the stories they knew about me from my teenage years, because we don't want to talk about that. Yeah. But so good to be with you here today, and appreciate John the opportunity to do this. What frightens you? What keeps you up at night? When I was 6 years old, we moved to a new house in Cedar Falls, Iowa. It was a better house, more bedrooms, it was newer, but it had one problem. There were monsters in the basement. And I knew there were monsters in the basement because my brother told me so. He would take me downstairs to show me the monsters in the basement, and then run back up the stairs and close the door and turn off the lights and laugh. While I'm trapped down there with the evil monsters in the basement of my house. Another thing that terrified me when I was a kid, growing up here in eastern Nebraska, I'm thinking you could probably relate to this, is tornadoes. Tornado siren would go off, and woo, 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 and on the TV you'd hear it, and this feeling of panic would rise up within me, because you had to flee the tornadoes. And where do you go to flee a tornado? The basement. Yeah, the haunted basement of my house, right? And then so we'd down in the basement, and then I'd be upset and crying, and my dad would get a headache, and he'd have to go get some aspirin, which is upstairs with the tornadoes, So I'm crying, no, Dad, don't leave me. And it was a miserable experience for everybody there. Well, now that I'm older, I know that's ridiculous. Demons don't live in the basement of my house. They live in my computer and make it do strange things at the worst possible times. Right? Our world is filled with frightening things, with evil, dark forces. And this has been recognized by people around the world throughout the centuries. You may have heard the old Scottish poem, from ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night. Good Lord, deliver us. Now, maybe it's more pragmatic things that frighten us nowadays. Our modern fears go by different names, like ISIS, or cancer, or COVID. Right? Or perhaps your fears are more mundane, things like employment and finances, retirement income. Whatever it is you fear, we fear these things because we can't control them. They're out of our control, and so they create fear within us. Right? Well, this morning we're going to see Jesus challenge people's fears and leaving them to struggle between fear and between faith. And our story starts, as John read for us, on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. One day, Jesus has been teaching and healing them by the Sea of Galilee. And when he said to the disciples, let's get in the boat, go to the other side. So they pile in the boat and they head out onto the open water. And Jesus is tired. He's so tired from his teaching and preaching. He lies down at the bottom of the boat. And he falls fast asleep. But what should have been a 3-hour journey to peace and quiet turns into a nightmare. While they're out on the lake, a severe storm comes up. The Sea of Galilee is surrounded by steep hills, particularly on the north side of the sea. And so when the weather changes and the wind would rush down through these canyons and all of a sudden hit the Sea of Galilee and really churn up the waters very quickly. And it happens surprisingly fast. And that's what happened here. They're out in the water when suddenly the winds pick up and the waves arise, and pummeled by the high winds and strong waves, and the boat begins to fill with water. And this must have been an especially fierce storm, because these guys are fishermen. They grew up on the Sea of Galilee. They know what to expect. They know how to be out there. They spent most of their lives on the water in these boats, and they've been through storms before, but this time it's different, and they're scared to death. Now keep in mind, this isn't Carnival Cruise Lines we're talking about here. This is a small boat powered by oars and probably one small sail. There's no radio to call for help. There are no life jackets or life vests, lifeboats to get into. And by the way, notice they took this journey in following Jesus' commands. It was his idea to take the journey. They did it in obedience to Jesus. The Bible doesn't teach us that following Jesus always leads to smooth sailing. They're doing exactly what he asked them to do, and now they find themselves in the midst of a storm. And they're fighting for their lives. And someone yells, "Whose idea was it anyway?" And somebody else yells back, "It was Jesus' idea." And then someone says, "Well, where is he?" They find him sleeping in the back of the boat. And Jesus must have been really tired because, sleeping in a small wooden boat would be hard under the best of circumstances, I would think. But here they are in the midst of a storm, and he's sleeping. He must have been really tired. But there's more to it than the fact that he's tired. It's also a display of his trust in God. That the boat is tossing and turning, but he's not. The Bible often describes sleep as a gift that God grants to those who trust in him. For example, Psalm 4, verse 8. "I will lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." Have you noticed how hard it is to sleep when you're not at peace? It's one thing to be rational during the day and be able to wrestle with thoughts, but you lie down at night and you toss and you turn like a boat on the open seas. You can't rest because you're not at peace. You lie at night, wake at night thinking about your job or your spouse or your health or your finances or your past or your future, or on and on and on it goes. And these things that you can control during the day suddenly seem out of your control, and you lie there, and the more you think about it, the worse it becomes. And you could add to that list too, right? You'd add to your list of things that keep you awake at night. Well, the disciples are in the same boat, literally. Jesus is sleeping during all of this, but the disciples don't interpret his sleep as trust in God. They didn't interpret his sleep as a lack of concern about them, for their situation. And so they wake him and say, "Master, don't you care if we drown?" You ever felt like that? You ever felt like crying out to God? "Don't you care? Can't you see what's happening to me? Don't you know what's going on?" You ever felt like God was sleeping while you're facing some time of crisis in your life? "I feel like I'm drowning over here in a sea of fear and doubt. Don't you see what's happening? Don't you care enough to do something about it?" Handling all this stuff would be so much easier if we could just knew that he cared through the process. So Jesus does something. He doesn't give them a lecture. He gets up and he rebukes the wind and the waves. "Peace, be still." And suddenly the wind dies down. The water calms. The waves cease. All was calm. The Creator had calmed his creation. But after Jesus rebukes the storm, he turns and rebukes his disciples. He didn't say, "Where's your courage, boys?" He didn't say, "Where's your seamanship? Don't you know how to command a boat? Come on." What he said was, "Where's your faith?" Ouch. After all the things they'd seen, after all the experiences they'd been through with Jesus, you would think they'd have a little bit of faith, wouldn't you? And Jesus calls them out. "Where's your faith?" And yet we can't be too hard on the disciples, can we? Because we like them too much. We fancy ourselves as professionals on the sea of life. We know how to get around, but suddenly a storm comes up and our faith seems to take a backseat to fear. And I think of all the times that Jesus has seen me through difficult situations, and he's always been faithful to me in the past. You'd think I wouldn't struggle that much with concerns about the future, right? Yet I do. So I wonder if he ever looks at me and says, "Terry, come on, where is your faith?" It's easy to be courageous when the sea is calm. But you don't know if you have faith until you're facing a storm in life. And so after all of this, disciples, they're still living in fear. But now they no longer fear the sea, the storm. They're afraid of Jesus. Verse 41, they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." That's the question that Mark is trying to get us to ask. Throughout his gospel, he's trying to get us to ask the question, who is Jesus? If they just realized who he was, they would not have been afraid during the storm. Now, don't read into this that Jesus will keep all the storms out of your life. He never promised that. But he did promise to see you through, to be there with you through the storms. You can't sink with God in your boat. And the early church loved this story. And one of the favorite scenes in early church art, you can see this is still preserved in some places, was the idea of the church as a boat with Jesus there at the helm. The storm is raging all around them. And the boat is being pounded by the wind and the waves, but Jesus is at the helm seeing them through. Because think about the early church. They're being persecuted from all sides, from the Jews, from the Romans. Nobody likes them. They're caught in a storm. But God is there guiding them through it. And the message was this: the peace is not the absence of turmoil. Peace is the presence of God in the midst of a turmoil. Because that was their experience. He hadn't calmed the storm. He didn't drive off the Romans or the Jews, but he was with them in the midst of a storm and seeing them through all the difficult times they were facing. And so, yeah, we'll face storms in our lives as individuals, as families, even as a church. But rather than respond with fear, we can move forward in faith, trusting Jesus to see us through to the destination. Great story, right? But the story doesn't end there. Because the journey of fear wasn't over for the disciples. Chapter 5, verse 1, the next verse, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. And this is important because they went across the Sea of Galilee to the southeastern side. On the western side is Jewish territory. On the eastern side is Gentile territory. They're out of their homeland now. They're not on their territory. And you have to feel sorry for the poor disciples. They had this horrifying experience at sea. You know what it's like when maybe you're on an airplane and it's jostling around and you finally land, I'm never going to fly again. Or you're in a boat and have this terrible experience. This is what they're feeling. They get out of the boat and they fall onto the shore. They're thrilled to be on dry land. They're just kissing the ground, ready for some rest. But look what greets them as they land on the shore. Verse 2. When Jesus got out of the boat, the man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. The man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he'd often been chained, hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. I mean, everything about this scene was disturbing to the disciples. This is Gentile territory. They're out of their homeland, and the tombs are nearby, which means it's unclean. There are pigs nearby, which are also unclean. And all this is foreign to them. And suddenly, this, Wah! As a fog rolls over the tombs. I mean, you could just hear the eerie music playing, right? This is a scene made straight from Hollywood here. This man comes out of the fog and running away from the tombs, his wild look in his eyes, and he's naked, and he's got pieces of chains hanging from his wrist, and his cuts in his body. Ah! I'm back in the boat. Everybody, let's go. Storm or no storm, I'm out of here. They don't want to be there facing this man. You could hear their hearts beating. I'd be back in the boat. Storm or no storm. Right? But Jesus doesn't run. He stands there. Because he sees somebody made in the image of God. See, when I look at somebody who seems intimidating, somebody who acts intimidating, someone who's caught up in evil, my tendency is to fear them or to hate them. I don't want anything to do with them. Get me out of here. But Jesus knows that person is not the enemy. The real enemy is Satan. This person is being held hostage by Satan. And Jesus wants to set this hostage free. So this demon-possessed man comes running across the field, screaming at the top of his lungs, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Isn't it interesting that just a few verses ago, the disciples were asking each other, "Who is this man? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Who is he?" But the demons know exactly who this is. This is the Son of God. And it's not just this man is possessed by a demon. I mean, that would be too easy, right? He's possessed by a lot of demons. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." Now, a legion, that's 6,000 soldiers. So whether he had 6,000 demons in him or not, I don't know. But Jesus has faced demons before, but nothing like this. And it's one thing to cast out a single demon when you're on your home turf. But now he's in Gentile territory, facing overwhelming number of demons here. He's not faced anything like this back in his homeland, and Satan now has the home court advantage. I mean, it's a standard plot of a number of action-adventure movies. The enemy is holding somebody hostage, and the hero wades into the enemy territory, facing overwhelming odds to set the hostage free. He confronts the enemy, frees the hostage. That's a good story. And that's exactly what Jesus is doing here. He invades enemy turf, and he confronts a number of demons for the sake of a single hostage. It would have been so much easier to just get in the boat and sail away to peace and prosperity, but he's concerned about this one man here. And the demons, they know intuitively they're going to lose this battle. I mean, when you have a battle with the Son of God, you're on the losing side. And they beg Jesus not to send them back into the pits of hell from whence they came. Instead, they offer another suggestion. Verse 11. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." And oddly enough, Jesus grants their request. Now, from a Jewish standpoint, a bunch of unclean swine would be the perfect place for a bunch of demons to live. But why would Jesus allow this? I'll tell you. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe it's to demonstrate to everybody that these demons have truly left this person and gone somewhere else. But whatever the reason, as soon as the demons enter the pigs, they rush down the hill and throw themselves into the sea and drown themselves. Mark says there are about 2,000 pigs. It had to be quite a sight. 2,000 demon-possessed pigs running down a hill and throwing themselves into the lake to drown themselves. But don't get too overly concerned about the pigs here and forget what Jesus has done for the man. Because that's exactly what the townsfolk do. Verse 14, those tending the pigs ran off and reported this to the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons, sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. And then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. I mean, you can imagine the townsfolk running out to see what happened. They see this sea full of dead pigs bobbing up and down in the waves. And they see this man who had been possessed before. Now he's sitting there dressed in his right mind. And what's their reaction? They ask Jesus to leave. Instead of bringing their sick and demon-possessed to Jesus for him to heal, they want to chase off the source of their deliverance. Why? Well, the text says they were afraid of Jesus because he demonstrated power over what they feared, and so they respond with fear to Jesus. They're true controlled by their fear to have faith, and in their fear, they drive Jesus away. And the rescued man, he begs to go with Jesus. Verse 18, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus did not let him. Instead, he said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Why didn't Jesus let this man tag along? I mean, it would have been great on the circuit. And here's this former demon-possessed man. Give your testimony. But instead, Jesus sends him back home. Why? Well, for one thing, nobody needed Jesus like these townsfolk who had earlier begged him to leave. And nobody could testify to the power of Jesus like this man who'd been formerly possessed. Imagine his testimony. You know who I am. You know what my life was like. You know what I've done. But I've been delivered from all that by the power of Jesus. That's a good testimony. And notice there was a little subtle shift there. We tend not to pick up in the text. In verse 19 said, Jesus did not let him go with him, but said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, how he has had mercy on you. Well, it's Jesus who did the miracle, but Jesus said, how much God has done for you. See, Mark is letting us in on a secret here that Jesus is God in the flesh. He has power over the natural and supernatural world because he made it. He was there at creation. All that leads to some questions. Are you facing any storms in your life? Do you feel Satan at work trying to hold you hostage? So the question is, how are we going to respond to that? With fear or with faith? The disciples were afraid of the storm, and yet Jesus was right there in the boat with them. The townsfolk were afraid of the demon-possessed man, but Jesus is more powerful than the forces of evil. Tell me, what is it you're afraid of again? And the choice between freedom and fear is seldom as easy as one decision made for all time. I mean, I make that decision, I'm going to trust God, not going to be afraid, and then the next day, boom, it's back again. We all have exhilarating moments in our lives where faith seems to drive out the fear. And then we have these terrifying moments where the fear seems to overwhelm our faith. And that's why it's important for us to come together every week and tell the story again and to remind each other that faith is more powerful than fear. Wait, let me rephrase that. That the one in whom we have faith is more powerful than fear. That's something we need to hear again and again. Which is why the question of the story, who is this man, is so crucial. Because if he's just another human being, if he's just another man, then we have reason to be afraid of the dark forces around us. But if he's Jesus, the Son of the Most High God, we have nothing to fear. And I think at some level, all of us here are like this demon-possessed man in some way or the other. Either we're under the power of sin and Satan, or we've been delivered from the power of sin and Satan. Not because of anything we have done, not because of our own power and effort, but because of the power of God. Right? And so if you feel like there's some area of life that Satan has control over you, he can deliver you from that. You can't do it on your own, but the powers of evil are no match for the powers of Jesus. On the other hand, if you've been delivered from the powers of darkness, delivered from Satan, delivered from the storms in your life, then you have responsibility to do what Jesus told this man to do. Go back home. Tell your family and friends how God has been with you, how he has saved you and showed mercy on you. See, giving your life to Jesus is not just a matter of going to church. It represents as this battle between good and between evil, between God and between Satan. And Jesus set you free from fear, free from the powers of darkness. And when he does that, he gives you a mission, just like he gave this man. Go to the people who know you and tell them the good news, how God has set you free. And that's why we come together, to tell each other the good news. God has set me free. He has delivered me and brought me this far. And I believe he's going to see me through to the end. If there's some way we can help you as a body this morning to tell that story, to pray for prayers to overcome the powers of darkness, pray for the courage to go tell others about how God has impacted your life, that's why we're here as a body. So if you have a need that we can help you with, why don't you make that need known while we stand and while we sing.